I'm going to be more contemporary. I'm going to talk about uh, for a few minutes. Now, the framework for these discussions, for these presentations, and I think this was in the poster you would have received, is that three short lectures with time for conversation and comment. A little difficult to do in Zoom. A whole lot easier when I'm actually in the room and can see that somebody's interested or has something to say. Because quite frankly, in a Zoom situation like this, someone may have a question, may have a comment, but they're going to hesitate to get up. So we'll deal with that when we get there. First, a few notes about District 6 and 7 and lodges of education and research. Our Constitution has quite a section that has been in there for a long time on lodges of instruction. Now, a lodge of instruction originally was intended simply as a group of brethren who have hived off of their mother lodge in a new community and are just going to try it on without actually tiling meetings to see if there are enough brethren and enough interest to eventually seek dispensation and get a warrant. Something odd happened a little over 75 years ago, though, in Vancouver, when the Vancouver Lodge of Instruction, Education, and Research did not go through the usual channels of the Constitution, but actually got a license directly from the Grand Master. And for many years, the purpose of the Vancouver Lodge of Instruction, Education, and Research was as much to demonstrate the different workings in the Lower Mainland districts as it was to provide research or education. What very quickly happened, though, is where it was thought that by demonstrating the many different workings that this would be an education process and would further solidify the different works. What actually happened was that, and this in retrospect is kind of makes sense, is that brethren saw other workings, said to themselves, well, that looks interesting. Let's incorporate that into our working. And the next thing you know, we had a smorgasbord. And that ran for several years until Grand Lodge said enough and struck a rituals committee to try and actually document and create an authorized BC Canadian work and a BC authorized ancient work, the name of which went from being American to York to Scotch, and now we just settled on ancient, although it really has little to do with the original ancient work. So in your district, though, and I suspect you're going to get a whole lot of glare off of my glasses, but oh well, live with it. You had a lodge of instruction in a town of, and I'm going to mangle this pronunciation, Riondell. I don't know if anyone knows the community, but there was a Bluebell Lodge of Instruction, and it operated under Caslow Lodge for some years. Started in '54, had some interesting times, including an invasion of rats, goes the history, and vandalism. Survived for about 15 years, never actually went to become an actual warranted lodge. Sentinel Lodge was formed from a lodge of instruction. Now, Corinthian Lodge, I understand, is our host this afternoon. And we know that it's a consolidation of several lodges. I've taken a look at District 6 and 7, and many of you in the room will, I'm sure, know this history better than I, but it pays to occasionally revisit our history. You've had a lot of trials and tribulations, setting up lodges in resource towns, finding the mill or whatever goes out of business. The economics of the town collapse, and you've had to move. You've had to consolidate lodges, but you've survived over the years. And I think this is a really powerful statement about the power of Freemasonry, that you've managed to continue on regardless of what economic or civil conditions are going on. From 1883 to 1903, there were 10 lodges instituted in between those two districts. And many of them are still with us. First was Nelson in 1893. But there's also been attempts to start lodges that didn't go anywhere. And what I find interesting is how important your districts, your communities, your lodges, and your brethren have been to the history of this jurisdiction. Some of you may not know that you actually had an annual communication of Grand Lodge. I'm not sure, 1905 or something like that, in Rosslyn. And you might want to consider putting in a petition to have another Grand Lodge there. But then something else that I only recently discovered is that you had a Grand Secretary. And now normally we think of the Grand Secretary living near where Grand Lodge is. We think of Grand Lodge either being in Victoria or for a short period in New Westminster before it moved to Vancouver. And of course, in Vancouver, the boys in Victoria are lobbying occasionally to return Grand Lodge's offices to Victoria. Don't see that happening, but it's always a possibility. But the Grand Secretary is expected to live somewhere within commuting distance of the actual Grand Lodge building. When Grand Lodge was in New Westminster, for many of those years, the Grand Secretary was a fellow named DeWolf Smith, who lived in New Westminster. So you actually had Walter Quinlan, who was Grand Secretary from 1891 to 1901, so for a decade. And that may, to a certain degree, explain why you ended up having an annual communication in Rosslyn. He lived in Nelson. He came to you from Victoria Columbia Lodge originally. Also something that, if you know anything about our Grand Secretary, he actually got suspended for non-payment of dues for about 6 or 7 years, which says something about Freemasonry at the time, slow communications. He continued to be a member of Nelson Lodge. Nelson Lodge may never have known that he'd been suspended for non-payment from Victoria Columbia Lodge. Record keeping wasn't the best, and it took a while. And that still happens to this day, especially with an incredibly mobile workforce today, where a member who has joined the lodge moves out of the jurisdiction, moves across the jurisdiction, hasn't been a member long enough to know the usual processes, neglects to give a forwarding address. The next thing he knows, he's suspended for non-payment of dues. And then years later, when he tries to affiliate with another lodge, has difficulty and has to go through all of our hoops to be reinstated. We have to educate our younger members in what the process is. How we do that, I'm not sure. So some lodges attempted to start in your part of the world. There was, as some of you may know, of a community called Motherlode. And there was an attempt to start a lodge there. That's near Greenwood. In 1901, the Grand Master said there's not enough people around to do that. Alto Lodge was warranted in Sandon. And of course, it later amalgamated with Slocan and moved to New Denver. So as I say, you've been moving all over the place. I have a couple of quotes from histories that have been written about your jurisdiction, which I don't entirely understand and probably have underlying stories. One being in 1954, the Grand Master of the day was a fellow named William Curran. He was from Trail, and he laid the cornerstone of a Masonic building in a most colorful ceremony. We have no idea what that means, and I'm hoping that somebody might have a record of that in Trail. What was another one where they talked about emulation in Trail again? When they consolidated with Fidelity in 1982, their cornerstone was laid by Dr. Henderson, who was Grand Master, at one of the most interesting and dignified services ever witnessed. No description of why it was interesting, which always makes it, little mysteries that make it worthwhile struggling through old records and minute books and maybe correspondence and diaries if we can ever find that sort of thing. Now, all of these few notes that I've given you, they're just a jumble of dates and names and places. But this was written by a member who possibly some of you may still recall, a Albert Hearn, who was your DDGM in 1987, and he wrote a history of District 6 and 7. I suggest newer members of lodges in those two districts should take a look at this. It was originally written, I believe, published in the Grand Historian's annual report at some point, but it is available on the Grand Lodge website. More and more, we're creating mini histories, histories of lodges, histories of districts, finding old histories that have been written, transcribing them, running them through OCR, optical character recognition software, and posting them through our Grand Lodge website, trying to create a more comprehensive network of our histories. And this is where lodges of education and research and you individual brethren play a role. So that's a bit of our past. I recently came across, this is, as I say, one of the joys of me having such a vague title for my presentation means that I get to just wander all over the place, as long as you're still interested or don't object too much. Recently came across the original form we used for petitions for initiation. And we asked some different questions 150 years ago. We asked, the usual, what's his occupation and what have you, but is he addicted to the intemperate use of intoxicating liquors? Does he gamble or associate with bad characters? Does he habitually use profane or indecent language? And does he have a good character amongst his neighbors? And how many of us actually look that closely at a potential candidate to know that sort of information about him? Now we just ask if he's got a criminal record. So that's a bit about our history. That's about a bit about our past. The present. What can I tell you about the present of Freemasonry in this jurisdiction? Well, for one thing, I can show you, this is the new library and archives in Vancouver, or this is one small corner of it. We are still in the process of unpacking boxes. Off on the side here, those white cabinets actually are a row of compact shelving. We've got over 10,000 books in our collection. Most of them are reference texts. The database will soon, I hope, be posted online, the catalog of the books posted online for researchers, both academic and Masonic. We will have a small collection of books that are available for loan. Every lodge should have a collection of general interest books for Masonry. Far too many lodges, I've discovered, have these books. They're old, they're dusty, they're behind locked glass cases where on occasion nobody even has a key. Doesn't help much. You have a little further north of you in Kamloops, an excellent resource with their library and archives. And I believe they actually are more of a lending library than our collection. Our collection contains, well, the oldest book we have dates back to the 1500s. It's not particularly valuable. It is a Bible, and they printed a lot of them, so it might be worth $300 or $400. What we do have is a number of truly priceless books, including, I mentioned earlier, the founding of the first Grand Lodge in England in 1717. That date's a little controversial. It might be 1719, 1720. We're going to go with 1717 because it rolls off the tongue so nicely. But in 1723, the Reverend James Anderson published, as a bit of a fundraiser for himself, the Book of Constitutions of Freemasons. And there may have been, there's no way of really knowing, about 300 copies of that printed. We have 2 of them in our collection, so they're not available for lending out. Thank you very much. Except they have been scanned, and the text of them with commentary is available on our Grand Lodge website. We also have on our website the complete text of, I mentioned that 1395 Hollywall manuscript, or the Regius poem. The complete text of that with a modern English translation is also available on our website. That's an important document. That's where we got the expression, so mote it be. That's where we got the story of the two pillars, the porch or entrance of King Solomon's Temple. That's where we took a lot of our second degree emphasis on the liberal arts and sciences and their history. So it's an important foundational seminal document, even though it was not Freemasonry, it was stonemasonry. It was implied, its intended use was for stonemasons. But we have a reproduction of that made in the 1870s, which has also just this month, I believe, been reprinted in a new edition with a new modern English translation through Lewis Masonic, an excellent print house in England. Lewis Masonic is owned by a Mason, owned by a member of Quatuor Coronati Lodge, who is making available a lot of old documents, and well worth checking out. I'm not sure what else I can say about Freemasonry today in our jurisdiction. So I think I want to move on to talking about the future of Freemasonry. Now, over the last couple of years, as our sesquicentennial project for our 150th anniversary, edited, revised, brought up to date 3 histories that have been written about our jurisdiction in the past. And those are now available as PDFs for download on our Grand Lodge website. The most important one being John Marshall's text originally written in 1971 for our 100th anniversary. But there's another 2 by a fellow named Gamble and a brother named Robbie Reed, both of which give us a lot more color and information and background on our history. So those are available on our Grand Lodge website. I'm in the process of writing an updated 150th year history. Didn't get it finished for our 150th. Other things got in the way. But I have titled it, as a working title, Chronicles of Change. Because, and you don't hear this as much as you did when I joined Freemasonry over 40 years ago, but you still occasionally hear that complaint, well, we don't do it that way, or we've never done that, or well, we don't like change. And no one really likes change. Change is uncomfortable. But it's interesting that certainly in this jurisdiction, for 150 years, we have done nothing but change. If you look at our first constitution, 1871, we completely revised it in 1911. We completely revised it at least 3 times since then. And then back in 2014, we completely revised it with a plain language version, which we're still trying to correct and make it comply with the instructions of earlier versions. It's a work in progress. So I'm writing a 150-year history, and hopefully when I get that finished in the next little while, based on texts, correspondence, minutes, reports in the collection behind me here. We'll have a book published, something for your lodge historians, and I hope all of you have lodge historians. Behind me in the gray cabinet here, I have, it's a project. We haven't got everything in there yet, but there will be a file on every lodge in this jurisdiction. Whatever ephemera, whether it be installation programs or minute books, correspondence, bills, flating, anything that has turned up here will all be in those files. And if you're doing a history of your lodge, you can contact me, or if you happen to be in Vancouver, it'll be available for you as a resource. This will be a large collection because it's compiled from papers that have been given to my predecessors as grand historians over the last 50 years, and all the papers that came before that. And there's some interesting little gems in there. So Chronicles of Change, moving forward to the future, what is the future of Freemasonry? Well, I'm positive. I'm not as positive as some of our Masonic leaders today would be, because I have a day-by-day report on where our actual membership stands, and we continue to lose members. Our mean average age is 61.4. It's where it basically was 20 years ago. When I joined, it was more about 67, 68, my age today. Which brings me to another point, and I'm kind of rambling here. At 68, I still think I've got a few good years in me, but I tell brethren that the decisions for the future of Freemasonry should not be made by the likes of me. It should be made by those who are going to be living in that future. It's got to be looked at by our 30-somethings, our 40-somethings, our 50-somethings, the men who are going to be leading this craft in the future, who are going to be living their Freemasonry in the future, are ones who should be making the decisions about this jurisdiction. Slight digression, a few years ago, we got online. Freemasonry discovered the internet a few years after the internet turned up, and we decided we needed to have a social media policy. My advice to the Grand Master and the Grand Secretary was that there shouldn't be anyone on that committee who was over the age of 40. The committee should be entirely composed of brethren who understood, who lived on the internet, who understood social media at that time, both basically just Facebook and online forums. And the entire committee was appointed and was all composed of people over the age of 60 or 70. And the way the report got written, of course, reflects that. So we have to engage with our younger members, our newer members, ones who understand the latest technology and understand what sort of impact it's going to have on Freemasonry. I see Freemasonry going through many changes in the future, and I have to clearly state, I don't necessarily agree with a lot of these changes that are going to happen, but I suggest that they are inevitable simply because Freemasonry, if you look at us over the 300 years that we've existed, in 300 years of social history, we have, as a rule, reflected the time and place that we've lived in. We've reflected our communities, our community values, not always reflecting the best of the philosophy of Freemasonry, but reflecting the society we lived in. Society is changing, not necessarily the way some of us would like it to, or approve of, or are comfortable with, but it's changing. And Freemasonry is going to have to change with it. As I say, I do not necessarily agree or approve with any of this, but these are discussions moving forward that we're going to have. One that we have dodged for the last several years. And for those of you who follow the proceedings of Grand Lodge, you will know that our Jurisprudence Committee has consistently returned a nil report for the last 4 years because they refuse to deal with the issue of transsexuality and how that's going to impact our membership. We're still waiting for a policy on that. I get as another issue, and again, I'm saying this is not something that I'm in favor of or approve of, but the groups that are growing around the world, where Western Freemasonry, English-speaking Freemasonry, continues to see a decline in membership, where it is growing, the non-European and non-English speaking community, often in what we would consider irregular or clandestine Freemasonry, they are initiating atheists. They are initiating women. Don't say we should go that way. I'm saying that these are questions that we have to look at, we have to discuss. We have to be open to the fact that this is happening. There has been discussions in this jurisdiction about what does it mean to have a tiled meeting. Now, you had your tiled meeting, you had your installation, and then you went to refreshment so that I could join you with this Zoom conference. We discovered during COVID the value, the power of Zoom communication. And there are those brethren in this jurisdiction who would like to see us actually allow Zoom cameras, audio visual in lodge while it's tiled, so that members at home or elsewhere could actually, I don't know about participate, but observe the goings on. There are those who would like to see us actually have the annual election of our Grand Lodge officers conducted online through Zoom or some other application. I'll ignore that. We or would like to see, since we now have had for some years at considerable expense, an AV component at our annual communication. And I would say if you looked at the budget of our annual communications, the cost of running Grand Lodge annual communications, perhaps half of it is the audiovisual component. I'm not sure. You'd have to look at the numbers. It is expensive, but that facility also would allow us to simply put that out so that people could be sitting in the comfort of their own home or in their lodge hall, watching and perhaps participating in Grand Lodge. So the argument for that, of course, is that it enlarges our franchise. It further engages the brethren and the membership. The downside, of course, being the value we place on privacy, the value we place on security, the concept of a tiled space, which is a spiritually tiled space. We tend to overlook that value, perhaps. There are many issues there. I'm not saying I'm for or against any of that. I'm saying that these are discussions we should have. And moving into the future, where should those discussions take place? In lodges of education and research. I believe that's the best place. And we now have your lodge, the Kootenay Lodge of Education and Research. We have what used to be the Mid-Island Lodge of Education and Research, which is now calling itself the Celestial Lodge of Education and Research. It's a revival of that one. The Victoria Lodge of Education and Research has been active for quite a few years. And the brethren in Kamloops probably will not go this route, but there has been discussion about forming a Lodge of Education and Research. Here's another area for the future of Freemasonry. And this is happening in the lower Vancouver Island, and it is happening in the Kamloops area, where they are having what they call Masonic cafes. This only works, of course, if you have a critical mass of members who have the free time to get together. But in Kamloops, there is a group that meets on Friday evening, every Friday evening, for the two lodges there. And any brother who needs any new brother, anyone who's still going through his degrees, can come out and be mentored, be coached, be helped. He can ask questions about what it means. He can be helped with his memory work. Friday evening. There's another group that meets every, I believe, Saturday or Sunday around noon for coffee in one of the coffee shops in Kamloops. As I say, there's a group of lodge secretaries in the lower Vancouver Island who are, I believe, now regularly meeting just to talk about things Masonic, because that's what they mostly have in common, but also just to talk, to get to know each other. And I think that's a valuable component of Freemasonry that we have allowed to slide. There were two areas that I believe we've allowed to slide in our concern about getting bums on seats, where we have focused a lot on leadership training, which in my belief is not really our job. And we focused on administrative areas and perfection of memorization of ritual. We also talk about the lodge experience, and that's a term I still haven't entirely found a satisfactory definition of, but engaging brethren outside of the lodge, getting together for coffee, getting together. It doesn't have to be anything formal, and it doesn't have to be the same group every time, and do not keep minutes, but do get together and talk. Build those social networks. Freemasonry is both a network and an organization, and the network came first. The network is important, and that's just brethren getting to know each other. You know, there are so many other things that I could talk about. About our history, about our past, our present, and our future. Between each of these pieces, I was supposed to, as I say, pause to see if anyone had any comments or questions, but I think I'm going to do that now. First of all, I want to, before I wrap this up though, I want to stress the importance of knowing your history, of looking at your history. And it's not just the history of your meetings and who was your master and who was your lodge secretary and how many visitors you had, but it's the social history. It's the biographies of your members. It's what they did in their community and what you're doing in your community. And what you're doing in your community doesn't have to be an organized, you all get together and go down and help out at the food bank, or as we once did, drive cancer cars or other things organized of that nature. It's a one-on-one exercise of letting people know you're a Freemason, and that's why you're doing what you're doing to help your community and to be a good neighbor. No, I'm rambling now. I'm going to ask, does anyone have any comments or questions they'd like to make? And I'm not sure if I'll be able to hear you. We'll see how this Zoom thing works. Where'd you go?
I've unmuted on our side here. So give me a thumbs up if you can hear us.
There you go.
We'll see if that mic works, and does it get to Trevor?
Yeah. All right. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Trevor,
We have the technology.
Trevor.
Okay, so I think we'll have to come over here. If you want to ask a question, come to the secretary's desk, if that works. We've got one coming. Now we can see you on this camera, but we can...
We'll see.
Yeah.
Trevor.
Hey there.
So you touched base on the thought of Zoom tiled lodge meetings, and I know it's not going to that. Hopefully the powers that be that are considering and mumbling about this think about the experience of brotherhood. By going Zoom and that, you lose that connection with the brethren. You also lose the ability to get together, because more and more brethren will opt out to sit at home in front of the screen with their pajama bottoms on and just wear a suit top. So I think even speculating that moving that way, I think the craft would lose its identity by amalgamating technology that deep into the craft as it stands. What's your thoughts?
Oh, I very much agree. The value of Freemasonry in today's society, current society, there was a book published over 20 years ago called Bowling Alone. Can't remember the author of it, but basically his premise was that people don't socialize anymore, that they may still go bowling, but they don't join bowling leagues, that they may still be involved in various activities, but they don't do it as a club or a group. We are, as I said earlier, we are a network, and a network isn't just electronic. A network is the people you know. And how do you know people? Face to face. It's shaking their hand. It's looking in their eye. It's being able to hug them if you feel so inclined. It's that contact, that physicality is a key component to what Freemasonry, I believe, is about. So no, I don't see us as, you know, I hear the argument that well, we want to engage with our at-home brethren, and we want to engage, you know, with as many as possible. I understand that argument, but that, I believe, would take away from Freemasonry, no question. No, as I said, these are not arguments I'm putting forward. I'm saying these are discussions that are out there, and we have to deal with them and put paid to them if that's necessary.
Another point, and this is just to hopefully create discussion with the brethren here as well. Another point would be the one about how Freemasonry should change with society. When I look back at the history, Freemasonry has almost shaped a lot of our society. And for us to have to adapt to meet society's whim, I think that would be going a bit too far, because we would lose, again, our identity of what we are. And we should not, I'm not saying we shouldn't be rigid, but we should bend like a reed in the wind. We don't want to break, but we want to bend. And to just arbitrarily change something because it's the flavor of the decade, I think would be a detriment.
No question. No, and certainly for much of that 300-year history, yes, we have, I'm not going to say influenced, but we have certainly been catalyst for change. We have, from our earliest days, been proponents of things that governments of the day didn't like. Franchise for everybody, the right to vote, the right to privacy, the right to choose your own leaders. Basically, the foundation of modern Western civilization was not written by Freemasonry, but we were certainly early adapters, if not using it before, in many respects, before it did become very popular. But by the same token, so those things, our key values, our core values, no, we cannot change those. That we have certain rights, but those rights are tied to certain duties. That we that our role is to be builders, not destroyers. All of these ideas, we cannot let go of any of those. Silly things, though, that we sometimes double down on for no other reason than cultural. I remember when I joined in 1980, there was quite a discussion about whether you should wear your apron over or under your jacket. Who gives? Never mind. Who cares? But, and basically that came out of the Second World War, because you had a generation of men either wearing double-breasted jackets, which look silly open, or military uniforms, which you had to have buttoned down. So we were influenced by cultural norms rather than any spiritual value. I've been reading a lot of, in my research, proceedings of our jurisdiction. And what was interesting in our annual proceedings up until the 1980s, I think, we used to publish reviews of the annual proceedings of other North American jurisdictions, and occasionally England and Scotland, Ireland, but North American ones. And some of the comments made in there, especially in the southern states, I'm not going to repeat, but they weren't certainly up to current social norms. Well, what was it? The Grand Lodge of Mississippi lifted recognition of the Grand Lodge of New York in the 1920s because they had installed as their grand chaplain a black. Those are cultural values that change, and we have to be in front of those, but we, as much as possible, of course. I remember in this jurisdiction, when the Grand Lodge, speaking of blacks or Prince Hall, in this case, Prince Hall Freemasonry, Washington recognized Prince Hall Freemasonry in, I'm going to say 1898 or something. They then succumbed to peer pressure and unrecognized Prince Hall because every other mainstream jurisdiction de-recognized them. Our jurisdiction, our Grand Master or our Grand Secretary, I can't remember, said, none of our business, we're not going to lift recognition, and we're not going to say that you can't visit lodges in Washington just because there might be someone from Prince Hall there. It's none of our business. But but the argument against recognizing Prince Hall was that this jurisdiction has never had a bar based on race or skin color. We don't see any reason that they should be separate. They should join our lodges. Now, we now recognize their history. We have to obviously recognize the history of racism in the States, and we have to validate their Masonic experience, and we do. That's an evolution of our society and our values as well. So there are areas where we can change. Not saying we're going to go so far as to, well, the other thing was, so you look at the Lodge Officers Guide, which is out of print and has now been taken over by the Rituals Committee. Don't get me started on that. Full disclosure, I'm an anarchist. So the worst thing I can call someone is a centralist. And we have too many centralists in Grand Lodge. I say that with brotherly love. So now I've lost what I was talking about. Recognition of no, sorry, completely lost where I was going with that one. Ask another question, please.
You did bring up, and I'm sorry I'm taking over, but you did bring up something else that was, should we have to, like, I understand the point about there are some social aspects within the world that we do, like you brought up, do need to consider and address and amalgamate. But you brought up another point that how other Grand Lodge jurisdictions influence and that, and should they dictate? Should there be a global level? Or, like, you know, I've heard rumblings that we need our jurisdiction needs to meet global levels through other jurisdictions. Now, should we, if we're, it's opening up a can of worms, but should we allow other jurisdictions to influence our jurisdiction to such a high level, or should we try to always meet the worldwide view of what Masonry is? That are from other jurisdictions.
So you have opened a can of worms, because globally, Freemasonry is far more than what we would consider it to be Freemasonry, where it does include the women Freemasons and co-Masonry and the Grand Orient of France, which initiates atheists. And those are the jurisdictions often that are growing around the world. So no, we should not be influenced by them. We should certainly be aware of them. This jurisdiction, first of all, every Masonic jurisdiction somewhere, well, I don't think we use the exact term anywhere in our Constitution, but every jurisdiction is sovereign and independent. So we tend not to take direction, but to pay attention to what our founding Grand Lodges, England and Scotland, do. And we pay attention to the rest of the world to see if something works. There's much going on in Ireland where I'm not sure if they've actually reversed the flow of the decline in membership or not, but they certainly made a lot of changes, and there are members in this jurisdiction who are monitoring that. So let's not be influenced, but let's be aware. I know what I was about to say about the Lodge Officers Guide, where it talks about the uniform for a Freemason is a tuxedo. So, well, this of course is a Saturday afternoon, but that was so ingrained to members in years past that they would wear them at any time of the day. They wouldn't wait until after 5 or 6. More and more, you're simply seeing brethren who are wearing black suits rather than a tuxedo, and even officers. That's a changing social norm. And I suggest those are things where we have to be aware of changing social norms, so that we don't not scare away, but certainly turn away younger members who have different cultural touchstones. So one of the values I found, so I joined Freemasonry when I was 23 and walked into a room full of guys my age now and didn't make a lot of connections with them. It took years, but what I did realize over time, I talked about network, is Freemasonry allows you, and it does say in our ritual about being knowing brethren from a wide it doesn't use these words, but a wide socioeconomic group that you know, people that you would never otherwise meet, but not just people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, but also different ages. And of course, every different age has different touchstones of what they consider normative values. And being able to discuss that, to talk about, not even discuss, talk, chat, get to know different ideas so that we can learn to, if not accept them, to respect those views. That's, I think, one of our values, and that network is an important part of our, is one of our major strengths.
And what you just said there would be a point that it's not society directing where the craft goes. It's more the brethren that are coming in from society that are leading the way. But we should just make sure that that is differentiated, that we are not going to succumb to society's norms. It's from within the craft we grow, and it's from within brethren that are in the craft we grow. We shouldn't go, well, everybody's now wearing pink tuxedos. Should we all wear pink tuxedos? No, there's a certain degree, but there is going to be a point where cultural dress is going to come into play, be it of other nations. Their culture, we'll say the East Indian community, if they come in dressed in their cultural norms, they might not be in a suit. We should accept that. We should accept, brethren, that it's going to happen. And we should be accepting of that happening. They might not feel comfortable wearing a suit, like you just said.
We have to be sensitive. We have to be aware. We have to be Masons. That's what we learn, to be tolerant, to be respectful.
Yeah. Thank you, Trevor.
Anybody else in the room have a question for Right Worshipful Brother McKeown? I have one, and just before you hit record there, you had mentioned that Freemasonry has no roots or nothing to do with the Knights Templar, and that rose my curiosity, because there's certainly a lot of theories out there that people espouse. And I mean, in my reading, certainly there's roots from some of the ancient mystery schools that we might have inherited some of our traditions from. But maybe if you could espouse a little more on, there was no Freemasonry in King Solomon's Temple, and that we don't, that the Knights Templar weren't part of our heritage necessarily.
All right. Well, so let me start by talking about Quatuor Coronati Lodge. So Quatuor Coronati Lodge was warranted in, I'm going to say 1887, because I can't remember exactly when. And it was founded for one specific purpose: to promote what they called the authentic school of Masonic history. Their mandate was, they were a bunch of academics for the most part, authors, university professors, that type. They went back through all of our histories and said, if we cannot find documentation, now it doesn't have to be actual published documentation, not even written, but there is text to be found, whether, stone markings, or there were any number of ways of doing historical evaluation. But the point is, if we can't actually connect the dots, then we're not going to cherry pick our dots to make them look like they actually mean something. So I now am part of a 140-year tradition of looking hard at the claims made about Freemasonry. So let's talk about King Solomon's Temple. In the late 1600s to around 1717, maybe a little later. So, but there was a 30, 40-year period in there in which the final initiation. Are we all Master Masons in the room?
Yes.
Okay. Just thought I'd ask. The final initiation was not a dramatic reenactment of an episode at the conclusion of King Solomon's building of King Solomon's Temple. It actually involved Noah and his sons. And for whatever reason, in the early 1700s, a choice was made, and they went with the metaphor or the story of King Solomon. So King Solomon was not part of our mythos prior to the late 1600s. No evidence of that. If you read the Holywell manuscript or the Regis poem, it talks about several. It talks about Noah. It talks about the flood. It talks about King Solomon's temple because we had to somehow connect ourselves with the building trades. But we have to make a distinction between similarity and actual causality. Our inspiration for modern or contemporary Freemasonry is taken from the stonemasons. The stonemasons took their inspiration from major building projects of the past that they would have historically been aware of. But that doesn't mean there's any actual lineal historical documented connection. We, quite frankly, any serious academic student historian about Jerusalem will admit there is absolutely no documented evidence that the original temple was ever built. There ain't nothing at all. So we built a myth on top of a myth, perhaps. Worthy, perhaps, if you're interested in pursuing that further, of researching it, but you're not going to do that in documents. You're going to do that on the ground, on the Temple Mount. And I don't think they're letting you in there right now. So I'm still waiting for something to document that. As far as the Knights Templar are concerned, a couple of things. First, the first suggestion that there was any connection between Freemasonry and the Knights Templar doesn't turn up until the 1740s. Maybe later, actually. Certainly nothing in the old charges, certainly nothing in the Holywell manuscript, certainly nothing in Anderson's Constitution or our early rituals. Nothing is made about it. The first time we hear about it is when a guy named Ramsay, who you may have heard of, the Chevalier Ramsay, a Scotsman, turns up in France and gives a talk in which he suggests in an after-dinner lecture that Freemasonry finds its origin in the Crusaders. Doesn't mention the Knights Templar. It took another decade before anyone actually connected it with the Knights Templar. But there's absolutely no mention in, as I say, in anything to do with Freemasonry or stonemasonry prior to that date that even suggests anything with the Knights Templar. Now, there is an entire publishing industry dedicated to promoting this idea. A lot of it revolving around Roswell Chapel in southeast Scotland. They made absolutely no the trustees, the promoters, the owners of Rosslyn Chapel made absolutely no link or connection with the Knights Templar up until about 30, 40 years ago, simply because popular press was talking about a link, and they figured, well, that's good for business it's good for tourism, but they don't mention it prior to that either. This industry of books being published about Knights Templar has a lot of what I refer to as Von Daniken science. Von Daniken science, if any of you are familiar with Eric Von Daniken, a Swiss historian who's still with us, I think, who in the late mid-60s wrote a book called Chariot of the Gods. Von Daniken's way of proving his point was to ask a rhetorical question in chapter 1 and then refer to it as a question in chapter 2 and then refer to it as if he'd answered it in chapter 4, and by chapter 5 it's now a documented fact. He bootstraps. And that's pretty much every book about the Knights Templar. If you're looking for a particularly dry and tediously boring history of Rosslyn Chapel and the Knights Templar in Scotland, the now retired librarian for the Grand Lodge of Scotland, Bob Cooper, wrote an excellent, although weighty, tome called The Rosslyn Hoax. I can't go into the details of it. Most of it I've forgotten, but it pretty well it certainly convinced me that there's no evidence and there's no reason for us to see a connection to the Knights Templar.
That's very interesting. Thank you. I remember one of the things I had read was that after they had been made illegal by the King of France, that they had kind of, or the Pope or both, that they had run off to Scotland as one of their hiding places, Scotland or Ireland. But
so the argument is that the Pope excommunicates the Knights Templar. Well, he did not. He excommunicated a number of them. He dissolved the order. He didn't excommunicate all the members. 1. 2, at the time, we're talking about 25, 30 years after the fall of Acre, your average Knight Templar was my age, barely able to carry a sword, mostly spending his time guarding, if you will, some Knights Templar holdings, which would be a farm or a mill or granary or something of that nature. And a whole lot of other of the Knights Templars, members of the Knights Templar, were not knights at all. They were husbandry, farmers, whatever. 3, Robert the Bruce was excommunicated. The rest of Scotland was not. And there were any number of places that would be safe for the Knights Templar to go hide if they needed to, but they didn't for the most part. And finally, the talk about, oh, well, we can prove that the Knights Templar were all over Scotland when you look at the grave markings with the cross and the this and that. Bob Cooper very clearly points out that those same images are found on grave markers all over England or all over the United Kingdom in areas that we clearly know there were no Knights Templar. So it was simply a grave marker for someone who had been in the Crusades, period. So cherry picking facts doesn't prove anything.
well,
Now, if you're a member of the Knights Templar, if you're a member of the Royal Arch or the Order of the Knights Templar, you might like to see some sort of historical connection like that. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why we got ourselves connected to the Shaw family and Roslin Chapel, was when the first trade guild of stonemasons in Scotland starts. They wanted, like every other trade guild, to make their history as ancient and venerable as possible. And you just push the dates right back. That's sort of like the Holywall manuscript, where we push it right back to saying that Adam was a Freemason, that Noah was a Freemason. We got to make our history as venerable as possible. So the modern order of Knights Templar, I'm not going to say, I don't honestly know, someone else might be able to say, but I'm going to say early to mid 1800s, simply created as venerable a history as they possibly could without any documentation of it. I'm sorry. No, I'm not.
I'm sure you haven't offended anybody.
I hope not. I really don't like offending people.
On a different tangent, I thought I'd add, just because you were talking about the local history, the Kootenay Lodge of Education has inherited, for our jewels and collars, the Emulation Lodge number 125, which, as you mentioned, merged with Fidelity 32 here in Trail, and then Fidelity merged with Corinthian 27 in Rossland. So the various masters from 1958 to 1981 are engraved along this collar, and yeah, so there's a little piece of history.
I was going to comment on that, actually, because I saw that and said, "You're not an emulation work." What? It's a lovely collar, and I'm glad that it's going to continue to be used. That's excellent.
Have we got any other questions, brethren? Oh, we've got somebody stepping up.
Question I have, it can't be recorded.
I can edit the recording before it's posted to the internet.
Okay. Where's the mic? Where's the?
Just sit there and then you're on camera.
Hey, Trevor.
Hi there.
Hey, so I have a couple of questions about what we
deemed to be some inconsistencies in the drama of the ancient rite third degree. So near the end of the drama, the three ruffians are outside the door. Jubilah states the penalty of the entered apprentice degree. Jubilee states the penalty of the fellowcraft degree. Jubilum states the penalty of the Master Mason degree. But they are only fellowcrafts and have not received the secrets of a Master Mason. So how does Jubilum know the penalty of the Master Mason degree?
I can only answer that by saying that we're talking about a metaphor. We're talking about a myth, a mythos, and the framers of that ritual. Now, I would have to go back and read Preston. I know it wasn't, well, first of all, Preston, I'm not even sure if he used the names of the ruffians or not. I don't know if that may have been Thomas Webb in New York that put their names in. And then, of course, it went through many rewritings up until the Baltimore Conference of 35 or whenever that was, 1835 or whenever that was. And Barney took the work to New Mexico and California, and Nutt brought it up to Caribou #4. So how, where the changes in the wording came in, you'd have to do a much deeper dive. But there were many inconsistencies both in the ancient work, BC ancient work, and the BC Canadian work, simply because, in my mind, we had too many chefs and too many cooks in the kitchen. And there were too many people who were just enlarging on the ritual and often really didn't know what they were doing. It sounded good to them. They added words here, there. They moved things around. No, there is no historical answer to that question because, of course, we're talking about what at this point is known to be simply a metaphor and a mythological event. It's not, it's a fictional event. So the short answer to your question is poorly written. Sorry.
Sure. Yeah, because I do the part of the Senior Grand Warden, and I was speaking with the brother who does the Most Excellent King Solomon, and we were coming up with, yeah, there's a few inconsistencies here that don't make sense. The second one is the Master's word can only be communicated in the presence of three: Most Excellent King Solomon, Hiram King of Tyre, and Hiram Abiff. Well, we all know what happened to Hiram Abiff. Most Excellent King Solomon's in the east. That puts Hiram King of Tyre in the west and is the Senior Grand Warden. Now, Most Excellent King Solomon on his own substitutes a word, but between him and Hiram King of Tyre, or the Senior Grand Warden, they know 2/3 of that word. But Most Excellent King Solomon substitutes the word on his own.
So the word is lost unless you're in the Royal Arch, allegedly.
But it's just curious how Most Excellent King Solomon doesn't, in conjunction, in communication with my brother who's standing right here beside me, here's the first two parts of the word. Yeah, it's just inconsistencies that make people go,
Yeah, and this is why we have to stress that this is not a history lesson, which it was considered to be, as I say, up until the late 1800s, and for years after that by some brethren of a more literal turn of mind, perhaps. We have to keep in mind that everything in Freemasonry is symbolic. It's here to teach us moral and spiritual lessons. It's here to make us go, not necessarily go, about that's historically accurate, to go, what does that mean in how I live my life, how I relate to other Masons, to other people, to the public, whatever. It's all symbols, it's all metaphor, which is incredibly powerful. And it would have been nice if it had been a little better written. I do not recommend that we decide to rewrite it to make it more accurate, because as soon as you open up that can of worms, everyone's got their own ideas. I think we can consider ourselves lucky enough that over the years we had enough brethren who were of a forceful enough personality and had enough ability to at least give us what we do have over the years, and then just make the best of it. I'm no, just again, full disclosure. I was initiated in Canadian work, and at this stage, I'm actually more comfortable in emulation work. So I'm not that familiar with the American or the ancient work, but I certainly am aware of those curiosities.
Mhm. Actually, when I said a couple of those comments, I could hear brother in the background going, "Oh yeah, that's right. It doesn't make sense."
And that's an interesting discussion, as long as you don't take yourself too seriously. It's an interesting discussion to see what errors you can find in the book. Not that we want to change them, but to say, okay, well, how do we make sense of that? Or more importantly, perhaps, so that's historically not supportable, but why is it there? Why did the original authors feel that it was important that we did this way? Now, we had a tendency to write our ritual in threes, just to create that rhythm and cycle. And it may be nothing more than that. It may have just been a literary device.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
I'm not seeing any others jump forward, but that made me think of something that my current worshipful master in Caslo 25 pointed out to me in the fellowcraft work, the wages being corn, oil, and wine. He said they wouldn't have had corn until Europeans went to Mexico. So there's another make you think.
Well, historically, the word corn also referred to, I believe, wheat, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
So I think that's the
That-
explanation for
That
that.
answers that question.
The other thing we do have to pay attention to with our ritual is that much of it was written 100, 200, 300 years ago, and the meanings of words have moved. The other thing to keep in mind, and there's a brother in this jurisdiction named Mark Dwar, who occasionally will give an excellent presentation on the biblical, not the biblical roots, but the biblical aspects of our rituals. And he points out that to your average Freemason in 1717, in 1850, up to the early 1900s, they would have deeply been aware of the wording of the Bible. They knew the Bible. They knew the stories in the Bible. And there are any number of incidences and examples in our ritual where we make reference to biblical passages, and they don't seem to make any sense as to why they're there. And he goes into some detail explaining how certain personages or certain events took place, how it all builds towards the building of King Solomon's temple, which to someone who knew the Bible, it would have been self-evident. One of his examples is Samson and Delilah, in which he points out that if you really understand this story, sure, he loses his great strength when his hair gets cut, but why? And why does Samson get mentioned? Now, I don't know if he gets mentioned in the ancient work. He does get mentioned in the Canadian work. Why does he get mentioned at all? Well, the reason he loses his strength when his hair is cut is because he made a promise. He made a vow to God never to divulge the source of his strength. So he loses his strength because he broke his vow, which is a very Masonic lesson. But unless you know the Bible, you would never be aware of that. And our ritual is filled with things like that. And that's what I think is, to a certain degree, more important as Masonic education, is studying the thinking of the framers of our ritual. What did they mean? What were they telling us? I think that's sometimes more important than leadership training. What have you? How to run a meeting. That's not Masonic. I think we can muddle through on that without losing the spirit of Freemasonry. Sorry, I got on my hobby horse again. I'll be quiet.
I guess one last question that's more personal with the Grand Lodge website, which is very loved by many. I know they're in the process of modernizing it, and I hope that all the content moves over. A, have you been involved a little bit in just advising in that? And B, can we keep an archival version of that as it stands now as well, and keep that online?
Thank you very much for raising that question. So it's complicated. Communication does not seem to be Freemason's strong suit. We strike all these committees and then they don't talk to each other or talk to the Grand Secretary's office. The new website that was put up a couple of years ago now completely blindsided me as the administrator for the current website. Then just over this summer, someone else has been put in charge of it, and the fellow who was running it was completely blindsided to find out he wasn't involved anymore. So we haven't been exactly polite about keeping each other in the loop about this sort of things, which is a bit of a problem. I don't take any of it personally, but I know we have had some brethren who have. Where we're going with the website. So yes, there's I'm going to say around 4,000 pages. I've lost track in the current website that's been up there since about 95. It is written in truly ancient code. If you know anything about coding, it's HTML2 and badly written at that. Thank you very much. But web browsers are incredibly forgiving and robust, and it still presents just fine. It's making it a bit of a challenge, I understand, to the brother who's migrating it to the new design. So no, I haven't had anything to do with that, but that's just as well, because my coding skills, I hand coded back in the 90s and the early days of the internet, and I have not kept up with it, and I don't use any of the software. So I believe Joe Clevance is his name. Joe's very dedicated, very committed to making this work, and he keeps telling me he's not going to have a problem with it. I'm waiting to see the result because I know how badly written my code is. So hopefully all of the content, yes, will make it over. There's some pages, actually, this is going to be a good opportunity for me to do a bit of a purge, because there's some stuff up there that I would have written 30 years ago that, well, I've had second thoughts about, so I want to fix. And hopefully I'll find time to do that. The entire current website, though, is going to be migrated to, I think, archive.freemasonry.bcy.ca or something like that. So it will be frozen in amber, as it were, and unchanging. The idea, we're in a transition right now, and I'm not sure how Joe is handling my ongoing updates, because every time I go into the website, I spot something. I say, oh, there's a typo. Oh, well, that information is wrong. Oh, I've changed my mind about this. So I'm constantly doing updates, and I keep sending them to him. And I'm assuming he's incorporating this into the new website. Once the new website is finished and online, the old one will be moved into the archive, and I will have access to continue doing what I do from the historical, philosophical perspective of the website. The value of the new website is that there will be a growing focus on current Freemasonry. So the Grand Lodge, the committee structure, and the Grand Master's message, and whatever they want to do without involving me. So I can just focus on everything that I want to reproduce out of this library here, because that's what motivated me to create the website in the first place. For the first decade, I don't know if anyone in the Grand Secretary's office, any of the Grand Line, even knew we had a web. Well, they would have known because I reported it, but I don't think they really understood. It wasn't until about 2005 that someone actually said, oh, well, maybe we could put something on the website. And I think the Grand Master's message went up or something that year. But prior to that, I was completely left alone, which explains why the focus is all on our symbolism and philosophy and history. And I'll continue to do that as long as they'll let me.
Thank you very much for that insight, Trevor. I was just curious about where things were at and where they're going, and I'm glad to hear that we'll keep a copy. I've probably been on the web almost as long as you have, and I remember slow dial-up HTML2 and version 1 of Netscape.
Yeah, but did you use Mosaic Beta?
There you go. I knew you would probably beat me by a few years.
My first modem was an Apple 1200 baud in 87, 88, something like that.
2400 was mine, but yeah, I think we should probably get our lodge back to labor, and we're going to move to closing. I really appreciate you attending and providing us with this historical insight. Great talk, great lecture, very enjoyed here in this rainy Kootenay day. And
Raining here too.
on the coast in the Lower Mainland.
Yeah, very odd.
Yeah, I had the power out last night in Caslow due to the storm, and so I spent that time polishing the silver of these jewels on these collars.
There
Anyway,
you go.
thanks again, Trevor.
All right. Thank you very much for letting me join you.